All right. Here's a quote. Art is nothing without form. Today, we're going to talk about form. Basic forms are derived from basic shapes. A square becomes a cube, a circle becomes a sphere, a triangle becomes a pyramid. The terms shape and form are often confused with one another as if they're meant the same thing. Criteria and characteristics that define shapes are explained by this way. Form is achieved by integrating depth or volume to the equation of a shape. It's a three-dimensional element of design that encloses volume. It has height, width, and depth. For example, a two-dimensional triangle is defined as a shape. However, a three-dimensional pyramid is defined as a form. Cubes, spheres, ellipses, pyramids, cones, and cylinders are all examples of geometric forms. Form is always composed of multiple surfaces and edges. It is a volume or empty space created by other fundamental design elements, points, lines, and shapes. So when we're looking at form, we're looking at three-dimensional shapes. Let's go back a minute and look at shape. Shape is a spatial form or contour, the characteristic surface's configuration of a thing, an outline or a counter. From ancient glyphs to contemporary symbols, shape is one of the fundamental elements of graphic designers' vocabulary. Generally, shape is defined by boundaries and mass. It refers to contour or an outline of a form, a plane or shape. It is a point or dot that has become too large to retain its pure identity due to the weight or mass, even if it still has a flat appearance. When this transformation occurs, a dot becomes a shape. A shape is a graphic two-dimensional plane that appears to be flat and is defined by an enclosing contour line, as well as by color, value, texture, and typography. It is the external outline of a plane that results from a line that starts at one point and continues back to the beginning. Creating an enclosed space or shape is composed of width and height, but never depth. It is a line with breadth. Shapes are used to define layouts, create patterns, and compose countless elements in a composition. So this example of the playful and unconventional shapes of the Museum of Arts and Design Identity Program are reminiscent of forms evident in buildings' original interior architecture and represent the museum's unique home, expanded collections, and diverse program offerings. A broad and visually diverse set of colors, textures, materials, forms allows this to happen for the Museum of Art and Design in New York City. So taking those letter forms, taking out the counters and filling them in become just flat shapes, but they don't leave them as flat shape. They turn them into solids made out of pattern, texture, and imagery. Here's an example from 1928. Vladimir Steinberg and Georgy Steinberg, also known as the Steinberg brothers, were Soviet artists and designers who came to renown following the Russian Revolution. After the initial interest of the engineering of the Steinbergs attended the School of Applied Arts. Here's an example of kind of a Russian avant-garde film poster. And I want you to look at the design. They've taken and they've cut out shapes and added in the facial features within shapes, and then left a very flat, the actual area around the eyes, the mouth, and the ears are just very flat. So they've cut out shapes and put in these elements within through flat shapes. So here we have the soft, inviting shape of this wine label It has an appropriate frame and background for its delicate linear border. So here you have like this diamond shape that the label has been, not only the design is in a shape, but the whole label has been die cut into a diamond shape. And having these linear borders and these line elements decorative the interior, but the whole shape isn't just wrapping around the bottle and drawing that shape. They've actually die cut the label into that shape. So you can also have shapes that are curvilinear, soft, may appear warm and welcoming, where a sharp and angular shape may appear cold and threatening. Remember the first day of class, I had you draw shapes with emotions, right? What were some of the emotions I had you draw? Who remembers some of the shapes and the idea that we were looking at drawing our shapes to have emotion?
Like a sad triangle or like a very proud square.
That's right. Yeah. And so why would I have us draw shapes with emotions? Is because we want to show emotion visually through shapes. And so here's an example. When we get into logo design, we want to incorporate meaning to our design, our shapes. So something that is soft and curvilinear may appear warm and welcoming, whereas sharp angular may appear cold and threatening, right? So that idea of what is like an angry feel or cold feeling, what do we do with a triangle to make it look angry? Or what do we look a triangle to make it look sad or happy? So taking things like making things sharper or making things softer with softer edges communicate different emotions. And as designers, we're going to be using shapes as one of our tools to help explore emotions and have people connect with a product or service. And we want to make sure we're communicating the right emotion for the right product or service, the right company. So when we think about things like straight lines and angular corners, what does that communicate? What does a curvilinear or circle communicate? What does it mean when it's perfectly mathematically geometric and crisp versus what you're seeing in this example, where it's very kind of abstracted and soft and gooey, and that these circles are like kind of blurring into each other, and nothing, it feels very organic, like it was made with a watercolor. And then here you can see they taken that same design and die cut it into the folder, the front of it. And so they're using a very proud square, if you will, for the logo. And they're using this very gooey circular illustration. So kind of showing these two extremes, like very square, very, trustworthy, and then this very gooey, soft feeling circle. That human connection of the soft and gooey circle with the, we are a company you can trust in this solid, proud square. So then going into this example of this New York City poster, it has thick, sturdy, bold, custom letter forms for NYC. And it starts to come into a pattern, right? So there's this idea of, this is communicating the strength and power of the New York City's branding and identity program. Used alone or collectively as a visual texture and pattern, this unique mark is designed as one continuous shape organized in a variety of compositional configurations. Because here's the shape of the logo up here. Let me zoom in a little so you can see it. So here's the shape of the logo, and it can be done horizontally, vertically, New York City, repeated. It could be done in a 4 square design. So they're showing a very modular identity system that can be used in many different ways. These letters bleed into each other, so they're all connected as one unit. And then what do they do with it? Well, they're mixing it with shapes. So here you can see 2 posters that are created with it. One becomes a pattern, taking that mark and turning it into a pattern where you kind of obliterate the look of it. Here we have it more like almost a quilt, It almost feels like you're doing a 4-square quilt. So you have two different feelings you're getting from the way these are configured. It's immediately understood as 3 separate and distinct letter forms, but they blended together. We might not always see the letter form. So here we see the letter forms really clearly on the left, but then when they become a pattern, they kind of disappear completely, but they still feel connected. Here's another shape, a bold 6-sided vertically proportioned hexagon, right? It's becoming a frame and a containment for a logo. So these shapes of simple hexagon can also be a place to put in a logo to separate it out on a piece of collateral or a package. It has this black background with a small pinpoint line around it that really kind of separates it out from the background. And it also gives a historical nod because we kind of see some of these shapes feeling much more reminiscent of a simpler time. And what does that communicate? Down here, we have these film festival posters that are for the Cleveland International Film Festival. And using unusual random freeform shapes representing the festival's attendees. Overscale, bold, black shapes set against vibrant color backgrounds are the identity of this memorable and eye-catching, fun posters. You know, really just looking at high contrast. So one of the design principles they're using here is high contrast. The shapes are cartoony, yet they kind of have qualities of a person, but not any one person. I mean, it could be any person. It's not really identifying, you know, anything. It's very abstracted. They're not identifying any race or gender. They're all very neutral. And so it's kind of anyone could see themselves in these characters that are very abstracted, just using basic shapes. So we see shapes in identity systems. So here's an example of a letter form like an M, then you get a little shape of a square kind of popping out of it. So looking at making it feel almost dimensional. It feels like it's 3-dimensional. It's popping off. It looks like it's coming forward. How we can do that with placement and the angle and the spacing that we're using. Here's another shape, freeform, a stylized window projected back in space. It's framed with soft corners, symbolizing a youthful appearance for the Seattle-based boutique realtor named Funky Lofts. So rather than showing a house for a realtor, they're like, let's show a window. What's that saying? Like when a door closes, a window opens? Maybe that's where that comes from. I don't know. But you see how this square, we're going back to shapes again, its soft corners make it friendly, approachable. It's showing it on an angle. So it's giving us perspective. It's optimistic. And just by doing things like softening those corners on the edge, it just gives it a very different feel than if it was a sharp edge. Think about like the Microsoft Windows logo. That's another window, but it's sharp, square, hard edge, right? This is very soft. So we can make our shapes look soft or hard. We can make things look fun or sad by the way we choose to design and play with those shapes. Here we have a visual, very bold statement with a big letter C. It's a geometric shaped letter form in the central focus point and singular message of this lecture series poster for Ivan Chermayeff. And they're playing off his name and the date of the talk. His last name is Chermayeff, and obviously he's speaking on May 2nd. So what a clever way to play on his name and his first letter of his last name, which is a C. So this is a poster kind of highlighting his lecture series, but really kind of being really minimal, focusing on just geometry. It's really just a circle with a line cut out of it, right? It might not even be a true letter form. It could be one that they've just made with taking a circle and cutting a slice out of it, right? It feels very, very simple in that regard. And then we have the thing of shape versus form. The terms shape and form are commonly interchanged, like we said at the beginning, you know, but they have two separate and distinct meanings. We are talking about shapes, which are just two-dimensional, flat. And so what we did for our assignment today is we just did flat shapes using our shape tool in Illustrator. It has two dimensionals character, whereas a form is three-dimensional. So we're not working in 3 dimensions right now. We're just working in 2 dimensions. And so here's an example of a promotional poster that was part of a series that was developed by Scholastic, Target, and AIGA to help educators introduce design to their K through 8 curriculums. The pro bono project invited designers to respond to an art piece by creating a poster that celebrated its themes or formal elements. The dual nature of Picasso's painted terracotta piece titled Vase, Bird, Animal, Half Object, and hybrid shapes evident in this poster. These playful, whimsical letter forms are further strengthened by an intense 2-color palette, a strong figure ground relationship, and all unusual overall texture that is engaging to the viewer. This is a way to kind of show, like, how do we, have you guys seen this before? There's this whole movement of taking an object and combining it with an animal and creating a new animal object. And so this is an example of that kind of introduction to design project. Super fun. So I'm going to pause here and then have us talk about shape and what we're learning about shape in this week's project.